Hey, what is going on, folks? This is Hellbent. It's been a while since I've done a video, so I thought to get some of the rust off, what I would do is I would release part of a customized GUI control set that I was working on a little while ago for a project, just to help me get off some of the rust. It's very easy to use and implement into your GUI to give you a little bit more customization on the appearance of your controls. So like I said, this is part of a set. Hopefully I'll release some of the other elements that I have pretty soon, but in the very least I'll release an example of the other ones. I won't go over how to use them. If you can figure it out, I'll show you an example of it. So these are the buttons. They're customizable. You can change their size, their shape. You can also change their color. It's not fully implemented. If you know how to, if you're fairly good at coding or understanding these things, I'll show you all you would need to do to implement the color change feature to it. But like I said, these are the buttons. The set itself that I was working on is for this project is buttons, these switches or checkboxes basically, radio buttons, and up-down control, custom up-down controls. So that's this. These were all created using the GDIP, the GDIP bitmap maker that I had released a couple of months ago. If you're not familiar with it, you can find it on my channel. It's a free download. You get this, and then with this you can create whatever you want, all kinds of different controls. That's what I use it for, creating controls. So these are the sets that I have. So these are the radio buttons. This is when it's not selected. This is when it is selected, and then I've done some customization to it to make it fit the product I was working on. These are the buttons. These are what I'm releasing today. So this is the default when you're not doing anything to the button. This is when you hover your mouse over it. This is when you press on it. And then I have the switches or the checkboxes basically. So that's off, on, and then I have the up-down control. Up-down default, up-down press down, and up-down press up. So this is the set so far. Still have to add some more controls to it. Get a few more control types into it. But we're going to be working with the button. I'm going to go over this quickly. Most of the stuff you're just going to copy and paste this code that I'm going to give you into your own script, and I'm going to show you how to run it and everything like that. If you get stuck, what I suggest, what I'm going to do at the end of this video, whatever code we type out in this video, I'm going to put that onto Pastebin. And then all you do is you go there and you copy the text, put it into a script, and you'll have the same thing that I have. What I suggest you do is before you continue, go get that copy and put it into a new script. Maybe wait until the end. Maybe wait till the end. Yeah, no. Go get a copy of it and then make two scripts. One for the copy and one for the script that you're going to work on to follow through. You want to follow along. The best way to do it is to follow along with what I'm going to be doing and do all the steps that I'm going to do. But have two copies. One copy where it's the finished copy, and then from that you're going to copy and paste into your new script. What I suggest you do is with the copy that you get from Pastebin, up at the top of it, maybe put the URL to this video. So if 6 months from now you want to add these buttons but you don't remember how, you can go to refer back to the video. That said, let's go into adding these controls. So I've created a new script. All I've added is single instance force. I've created a GUI, set the option to be always on top, gave it a background color. The theme of this is for, I haven't played around with all kinds of different background colors for the GUI, but My guess is it's best suited for darker themed GUIs. And I've just shown the window. That's it. So that what I have here is this window here that I'm going to add those buttons to. There's a few things I need to do. Because this is using GDIP, I need to start up GDIP. So I'm going to go and find somewhere else that I have. I'm going to just copy this and paste it in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up GDIP. Next, I'm going to create a variable or an array called HBButton. It has to be this name because the class uses this name. It needs this name to function properly. So I'm going to create a global array, initialize a global array called HB_button. Okay, next what I need is I need to have GDIP included, and I need two functions for this class. So I need the class itself and I need the hover function. What you can do, I'm going to be pasting everything into my script, but what you can do is you can put it into an external library and then just include that library. If what I just said if you don't understand what I just said, don't worry about it. Just do what I'm going to be doing. If you do understand, then you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't worry. Just do what I do. So there's three things I need. I need the hover function, which is this right here, HBButtonHover. I need the buttons class, which is this here, and I'm going to include the GDIP library. So I've gone through the GDIP library and I've removed most of the functions and only left in the functions that I need to accomplish the drawing and everything of these particular controls. So I'm going to include this light version of GDIP that doesn't have the complete library. It's only like, instead of being 3,000 lines of code, it's only about 500 lines of code. So I'm going to copy these three things: the hover function, the class, and the GDIP library. Because I never need to touch these things once it's in my script, I'm going to put them right at the bottom. In fact, I'm going to give myself a lot of space. What I would normally do is give myself a lot of space so that way I don't have to worry about the code that I'm trying to actually type out. I would do like 100 lines of white space and then paste it in. So I pasted in the GDIP library, the class for the buttons, and the hover function. And it's got a lot of white space, so that way it's out of the way. Next, I need to set up a timer to actually execute the hover function, so that way when my cursor moves over the button, it knows that I'm hovering over it. When I move it away, it knows that I'm not hovering over it. So I'm going to set up a timer right before my first return and put that there. I can also put it inside the class, like the last thing of when I create a new instance of the class. I can also put it there, but there's no problem in doing it this way. If you understand what I just said, know that you can do that. The last thing before it finishes, the creating a new instance of the class, you can put this in there instead. So I've set up GDIP, created my variable, set up the timer, and I've also included those functions and libraries. The last thing that I need to do, well, there's two more things technically that I need to do, is one, create a new instance of the button class. This is create a new button. So I'm going to copy a function call, or creating a new instance of the button, and right here, HB, so I'm going to push onto my array of buttons a new instance of the button class. The buttons class name is HB flat rounded button type 1. I need to pick a better name, but whatever it is, and then it has a bunch of arguments that I'm going to pass to it. The first one is where on my GUI do I want to position it? The X position, the Y position, the width of the button, the height of the button. The button color is not implemented fully. At the end of the video, I'll go over a little bit to show you how you can implement it if you know how to do these kind of things. But it's not fully implemented. So this one you can just ignore. Second one is the background color. The button that you see isn't the full button. There's a little bit of a trim around the button, and it has to do with, because when you press on it, it's got a little bit of shadowing and everything like that. So the button that you see, it's actually a little bit bigger, but the border around it has the same the color as your background. So whatever color you make your GUI, and like I said, you want to make it a darker color. Whatever color you make your GUI, make your button background that same color. Next is the text that you want to appear on your button. I'll change this to demo inside of quotes. Next is the font. Because this is using the normal GDIP, the normal GUI controls, when you change the font, let's say if I share this script with somebody else, and let's say if I make it some obscure font that nobody has, the normal default GUI, it looks to see if you have that font. If you don't, it'll default it to Arial. GDIP doesn't have that built in by default. You can code that in, that if the person doesn't have the font you select, it'll default to Arial. It'll change the way that the button looks, so you don't really want that. So the better option is just one, pick a font that the person that you know that your user is going to have, or two, include a note or something that says, hey, if you want to run this, you need to have this font. You can get this font for free by doing a Google search for this font, and you can have it on your computer in 10 seconds, right? Because in other words, the text isn't going to show up. Just keep that in mind. Next is the font size, so I can change the font size to anything I want. In addition to that, I can also add a couple other options, like I can make it bold, underlined, etc., etc. By adding, after the font size, adding a space, and then in quotes, add the other options. The GDIP library is case sensitive, so you have to so I think it's all of them start with an uppercase, so bold is uppercase B and then all lowercase OLD. Underline is uppercase U, and then everything else is lowercase. If you don't have them in exactly like that, it's not going to work because it's case sensitive. So that's how you can do that. If you don't want this to be bold, you can just get rid of the bold. Next, the text that appears on the button has two layers, a top layer and a bottom layer. The bottom layer is kind of like a drop shadow. So you can change the top and the bottom color, play around with them, get the colors that you want. Next is what window am I attaching it to. So usually when you create a GUI, you give it a name. So in this case, I've named my GUI GUI1. I could change this to settings or any other name that I want to give it. I can have 10 GUIs and I'll give them all numerical values, GUI1, GUI2, GUI3, etc., etc. By default, even if I don't include this, it's equivalent. So if I removed this, those two things are equivalent. So I don't technically need to add the 1. But in here, I do need to add the 1. So even if I don't name my GUI here, it is technically still GUI1. So the window I'm attaching it to, the label, so when I press the button, which code do I want to have executed? So this is the label I'm going to be attaching it to. The last thing is the thing that's not implemented fully. The default button, just leave this as 1 unless you know how to mess around with the code that's in this. The last thing is the roundness. So you can make a button that's completely square, or you can round the edges a little bit. The bigger the button is, the more you can round it. There's limits on how round you can make the button depending on how big you make the button. Did I say that right? So you can change the round depending on how big you make the button. You can determine how round you can make it. Smaller buttons, you can't make them as quite as round. Bigger buttons, you can make them more round. So that's it. The last thing has to do with the label that I'm attaching it to. So I'm going to use this. I can change this to whatever name I want, whatever you normally name. It could be a function as well. But test button press. So this is the label that's going to get executed when I press my button. Down here I'm going to add that in. And there's 3 lines of code. Technically it's 2, but it is actually 3. The first one is when I press on my button, if an edit box or something like that had focus before, I don't want it to keep flashing like that when I press on the button. Or I don't want, if I had something highlighted and then I press the button, I don't want it to stay highlighted. It looks bad. So the first thing is take focus away from the previous control and put it onto the button. That's all it does. It's for appearance wise. So let's go grab those. So that's the first thing. The first thing is give focus to the button. The second thing is to change the image of the button, because I showed you how in the editor how it's just 3 different images. When I mouse over and when I press, it just changes the image. This is what calls up that method within the class to change the image to the pressed. What this statement is saying, though, is that if I press the button, go ahead and change its image. If when I release the button, my mouse is still hovered over that button, go ahead and execute this code here. So I'll do run calc.exe. So this is what the button's going to do. It's going to run the calculator for me. Like I said, if I press the button and when I release it, if my mouse is still over that button, go ahead and execute this code. On the other hand, if I press the button and while it's still being pressed, if I move my cursor away and then release it, it's not going to execute this code. It's going to cancel. So that's what this statement here is saying. If I want to add hotkeys as well, so let's say I don't want to just have the button be able to execute that code. If I also want a hotkey to be able to execute that code as well, what I do is I add inside of that label, inside of this part here, but after these 2 lines here, or 3 lines here, that's where I add my hotkey. So let's say if I press 1, let's do control 1. So now I can either press the button or I can press the hotkey, and both of them will execute run calculator. That's it. I think this is literally it. So here we go. Here's my button. If I press it, it should run the calculator. Normal state, hover state, press state. If I want to, I can go through and change some things. Let's change the top color. I'll make the top color maybe I like a maroon or reddish color. Oh, that's too dark. Maybe I want red text. Right, etc., etc. Okay, so I think that's it. If I want to create more buttons, all I have to do is just duplicate this line and change some of the things. So, for example, I'll leave the X position to be the same. But one of the cool things about having, I've said it, one of the neat things about me including variables, temporary variables, because that's basically what these are, and having these values, is it makes adding new controls a little bit easier. Right? For example, if I want to add a new button and I want it to be underneath the other button with like a little space of 10 pixels, what I can do is I can say the Y position is going to be equal to Y plus equals the height of the previous button, which is currently stored in this variable H. So it's that Y position plus that height plus a margin of 10. And now this next button will be in the exact same position but 10 pixels below. And I can do the same. Maybe I want to add one more button, but I want it to have the exact same Y position as the last button, but I want its X position to be, I want to move it beside that last button. So I can do X plus equals the width of the last button plus 10 pixels. Etc., etc. Just makes it playing around with it a little bit easier doing it this way. Okay, the last thing is the feature about this color thing. Alright, like I said, this isn't fully implemented. Right now, this variable here would only apply for the default state. If you want to add, what you would have to do is you would have to extend this out and add in a few more things into here, and also into the constructor for a new instance of the class. So at the end here, you would also have to add a new thing, and then inside of the constructor you would have to set its value just the same way this one here is. Right? So this one is the default color. You would also do the, let's say you created it as being the hover color and pressed color. Down inside of the functions in here, I'll clean up this code a little bit, is where that comes into play. So that everything here is part of an argument. Is it a default button or not? I'm going to do the last button where it's not a default button, so it's 0. So it's going to be a custom button, or I'm going to customize the colors beyond the way it's supposed to be, or the way I have it set up to be. So now this color will take effect, and I'll make it yellow. Actually, I'll make it a little bit darker. I'll just make it yellow. I'm not going to go through all the code. If you don't know how to do this on your own, don't touch it. Just leave default. Default equals 1. Right? So now I have a yellow button. When I hover over it, the other parts are hard-coded still. So that's the part you'd have to go in and fix. So right now it's hard-coded that if I hover over it, it turns to this purplish color. Right? Because it's only the default color that is currently implemented. And it's implemented where the bitmaps get created. And it's these lines right here. And I'll mark them so you can find them. It's this here. So if it's a default button, it has its color set. If it's not a default, if you want to use custom colors, it's this. So the first one's already been done, where it's going to set the button color there. In the hover image, let me clean up some of the code. And I'll highlight it. In the hover function, it hasn't been added in. It does right now. It does give me two different options. See, I don't know if you can tell, but it's like a purplish color. But right now, that's hard-coded. There's no variable for it. So, like I said, you would have to extend out the class or the constructor for the class and change this to a variable. So this would be whatever you name it. This dot hover color, for example. Right, and this is for the hover bitmap. And then last for the pressed one. I'll clean up the code a little bit. And with this one here, I have to modify something for you. This should be this. Right? In the first two cases, it's the first color that you change or replace with the variable. In the pressed function or in the pressed bitmap, it would be the second color that you change. If you don't understand why, don't worry about it. Just take my word for it. It's the second color you would change. Or two colors you would change, whatever. But that's how you, if you want to implement those customized colors, that's how you go about doing it. You'd have to extend out the class, add those extra variables, and then modify those things down there that I've highlighted. It's this default button. If you're just using the default buttons, everything's set. It uses the color schemes that I've created. If not, you can use custom colors and play around with figuring out how to implement it in. Alright, that is it. Hopefully, so like I said, though, everything that I have here will be, let me make sure that I have a good example. I'm going to back this up a little bit. I want it to be, when I finish recording, I want it to be pretty much mostly identical to how you're going to see it. What I am going to do is, once I'm finished recording, I'm going to maybe add in some comments to make sure that you can remember that you have to add this is calling up new instances of the buttons. For an example, here's a, just as a contrast. What do I have? 135. For contrast, here's a regular button. So there's a regular button. There's the custom buttons. Let me change that text color to a more reasonable color. I'll do, okay, there. That gives a little bit better sample. Let me see, I'll do this one. Okay. So I'll leave everything like this. I'll add in a couple of notes. What I'll also do is, like I said, I don't know if I've recorded this now twice, so I don't know if I said this in the beginning of this one, but I'll include this script here that has an example of the other classes. If you're able to read through this code and figure out how they work, go ahead. Have at it. If you use these buttons, you do not need to credit me. They're free. You do not need to credit me. You just can't steal credit. You can't say, hey, I created these buttons. Me. Not me, you. You don't have to credit me, but you can't steal credit. Anyways, that is it. Hope you enjoyed. Hopefully it was easy enough for you.